Wednesday, May 4th, 2022 meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission. Ms. Bazemore, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Krosner.
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Ms. Tietz.
Here.
Mr. Puentes.
Here.
Ms. Weiss.
Here.
Ms. Colmont. Here. Mr. Hyra.
Okay,
All right.
great. I think Mr. Hyra will be joining us probably about 30 minutes. We'll get going. I'll read this notice. I will say to everybody, I was just talking to Paul this week, and it's looking like June we are targeting for coming back to in person for the Planning Commission after a long time. I think we're ready. I know Paul was working out some stuff on his end, but I've kind of told Paul that I think the time has come, and so it's looking like in June. I don't know if we'll have a June 1st meeting or if it won't be till the 15th, but it's looking like those may be an in-person meeting for us. So I'll just throw that out there. Hopefully, I don't have to read this too many more times, but I'll read it one more time tonight.
Mr. Chair, will they be on Wednesdays as well?
I'm sorry?
Will the dates be the same, Wednesdays?
Well, we can talk about that. That's a good point. I mean, I think that was the plan. I think that those are the dates I believe we adopted those dates as our meeting dates this year. I know there were some issues with staff, staff and their, ability to attend on, I guess it was on Mondays, which was our previous meeting day. We can certainly talk about that. I think in the past, Mr. Stoddard has indicated that there was, even before we made the shift to Wednesdays, that there was some benefit onto having it on this day, besides when it was kind of, besides when the pandemic kind of forced us to do that. So we can certainly talk about that. I've kind of gotten used to Wednesdays, but I'm open to hearing other thoughts on that. Maybe at the end of the meeting, if it's not too late, we can talk about that. So anyhow, the meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of the Planning Commission will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at our website, www.fallschurchva.gov/PC, and on Falls Church City Television, which is Cox Channel 11, RCN Channel 2, and Verizon Channel 35. Public comments are accepted virtually. Anyone who signs up to speak will do so via the meeting video platform. In order to do that, or provide general public comment, typically you would have completed a speaker form in advance at www.fallschurchva.gov/public comment before noon on the day of the meeting. Following the submission of the form, you would have received emailed instructions on how to join the virtual Planning Commission meeting. Written comments are accepted in real time at our email address, which is plan@fallschurchva.gov, until the end of the meeting. And if anyone happens to do that, those comments will be sent to us here at the meeting and summarized here at the meeting. Okay, so with that out of the way, we'll proceed to the adoption of the agenda, item number 3. Tonight we only have really the work session item, so I think it's pretty logical, if there are any other comments. If not, I'd look for a motion to adopt our agenda as it was published.
Mr. Chair, I move we adopt the May 4th agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Comont. Any discussion? If not, then a roll call vote.
Chair Krosner.
Yes?
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Ms. Tietz.
Yes.
Mr. Puentes.
Yes.
Ms. Weiss.
Yes.
Ms. Colmont.
Yes.
Mr. Hyra.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. And welcome, Mr. Hyra. Okay, so we'll proceed. We have no speaker series tonight. Are there any petitions, Ms. Bazemore? Did we receive anything for any items that are not on our agenda?
No.
Okay, just checking. So that brings us to our one action item, which is the adoption of the minutes from our last meeting on April 20th. Anyone have any edits, corrections, or comments?
I had a couple.
Go ahead, Ms. Coleman.
I think we should it was in the action items, number 6A. I think it's the April 20th minutes that we voted on, not the March 20th minutes. And I actually abstained because I was absent on April 20th.
Yeah. Oh, no, it was April, wasn't the 20th, was it? It was April.
I looked at the calendar. We had a meeting on the 20th.
Well, that was the meeting that these minutes were for, so it was talking about the previous.
Oh, it was the
20th.
April 6th then.
6th.
Yeah. So I was out on the 6th. Yeah.
Right, that was it was the spring break time. Some people were out.
So
Okay,
I guess, yeah, the date should be the April 6th, and I abstained.
that's correct. Yeah, that's a good catch. All right. Any other comments, corrections? I think the minutes are generally good. You know, these days with minutes, the trend overall, I think, in government is to have very concise minutes because state law still requires them and they serve some purpose, but you can watch the whole meeting online and that'll give you much more information than any minutes ever could. So the minutes are concise, but I think they seem to be accurate. If there's no other comments or corrections, then I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So Chair, I'll move we approve the minutes of April 6, 2022 as amended.
Thank you. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Any comment? If not, then a roll call vote, please.
Chair Krasner,
Yes?
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Dietz,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Colmont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We are flying along. That takes us to our main event of the evening, which is item 7A, which is a work session on, I'll try to read the item's title, although it's in the report, which is from council, but the item is a resolution, well, what item would be to grant a special exception site plan for a mixed-use building with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately 0.76 acres of land for the proposed senior housing building of the West Falls Economic Development Project located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, real property code number 51-221-010 on application by TC Mid-Atlantic Development V5 Inc. Okay, so it's a work session item. I think Ms. Bazemore's here for a staff report. I don't know if Mr. Fuller was going to provide an introduction, or otherwise we'll just jump right into it with Ms. Bazemore.
Yes, we'll just, Emily will introduce this item and the consultants. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just going to take a few minutes to briefly walk through the staff report and then hand it over to the TC Mid-Atlantic team for their presentation. So tonight, the Planning Commission is requested to hold a work session to discuss and provide feedback for the West Falls Special Exception Site Plan, SESP, for Block D1, and it's a senior housing application on file by, of course, TC Mid-Atlantic. This SESP application is a follow-up application to the Special Exception Entitlement, an SEE, that Council approved for the site back on August 9th of 2021. The approval of the SEE established the allowable use, which is senior housing, the building footprint, the building height, and other general design elements. The SESP addresses final architecture and final site design, as well as engineering. Our recommendation is that Planning Commission review and, of course, provide feedback on the SESP application on file for the 15-story building within the West Falls Economic Development Project. I'm going to hop over really quick to the council report just because it's a little bit more robust. So yeah, on February 16th, 2022, TC Mid-Atlantic filed a complete SESP application for part of Block D1 within the West Falls Church Economic Development Project. This is pursuant to Section 48-486C of the Code in conformance with procedures set forth in Section 48-488B for the development proposal. City staff reviewed the complete development application. We held a DRC meeting with the applicant team and staff back on March 16th of 2022. And then, of course, we issued a comments letter following on May 23rd. March 23rd of 2022. City Council saw this application in work session on April 4th, and their comments are captured in this table here. Just to briefly touch on some of their comments, they had some clarification requests on material differences. The applicant team provided a great update on the precast panels that they're using. There was some questions about LEED level. Of course, this building is going to be LEED Gold, which we love to see. There was a question about the operator. That's going to be SRG. Groundbreaking, that is going to be in May of 2023. There was some clarification requested regarding when that ground floor retail will open in relation to the residential part of the unit, of the building. And that's going to open a couple months, hopefully, ahead of the residential parts. There was some questions about parking, and the applicant team has provided a preliminary TDM, which is an attachment to the council staff report. I encourage you all to give that a look. And now I'm just going to hop right back on over to the Planning Commission staff report. So background, including our staff analysis, of course, is found in that council staff report. But I want to hop down to the application summary. So the site is Block D1, and it is part of the 9.78 acre West Falls Economic Development Project. The block is located at the northeast corner of the project at the intersection of West Falls Station Boulevard and Mustang Alley. For building and uses, we're looking at a mixed-use building with, of course, a maximum height of 15 stories and about 260,000 square feet comprised of the following uses. 260,000 gross square feet of residential use and a maximum of 212 homes, which is the breakdown is 22 memory care studio units, 58 assisted living units, and 132 independent living units. And then we have 7,900 gross square feet of ground floor retail. The ground floor will include 2 retail bays, a restaurant, a kitchen, and amenity spaces. Floors 2 through 15 is the residential use, which includes amenity spaces and building staff offices. Something to note is that 20% of the roof space will be a green roof, and this is per that voluntary concession submitted and accepted as part of the SEE for the site. I really quickly want to go over considerations for evaluation of SESP applications. As noted in the council report, this SESP application is specific to the senior housing building, which is a component of the larger economic development site. Zoning and entitlements for projects that are controlled by the 2-part SEE and SESP process. This is similar to, but has some variations from the city's special exception or the SE and site plan process for other major redevelopments. The SEE the SEE larger serves to set the framework of the project, while the SESP addresses final engineering. The elements of the SESP shall comply in all respects with the SESP as approved, including any amendments approved by council. An SESP may be sought and approved for all or any phase identified in the approved SEE. Council approved the site-wide SEE on, of course, August 9th of 2021. That SEE approval established the senior housing use and, again, footprint, height, and other general design elements. As we stated before, TC Mid-Atlantic submitted their complete SESP application back on February 16th. And the council reviewed the application in work session and since has referred on April 25th this application to boards and commissions, specifically the Planning Commission, the EDA, which is the landowner, the Urban Forestry Commission, and the AAB. Again, we already went through some of council's comments from their work session. And just wanted to note on line 66 of the staff report that the SESP process is intended to result in approval based on recommendations from staff and boards and commissions, specifically Planning Commission, and considerations used in approving site plans, which includes required application elements as specified and required considerations as specified in section 48-1141. SESP applications are considered against the special exception criteria. This is noted, of course, in the council staff report. On line 73, we have our guiding documents that staff uses to evaluate special exceptions and site plans. Those are, of course, the comprehensive plan, our small area plans, our design guidelines, our streetscape standards, the zoning ordinance itself, and other applicable city codes. Also want to note fiscal impact. The FIA is going to be carried over from the approved SE application as the change in unit count and mix hasn't really been adversely affected. I want to touch on our timing really quick. Right now we're with you guys on May 4th having a work session. We intend to come back for final action or our public hearing and our action on June 1st. In between then, we'll be going to the AAB on May 11th and the UFC on May 19th. The EDA just saw the application last night. We're looking for a city council second reading and a final action in early August, specifically August 8th. And now I just want to turn it over to the applicant team for their presentation. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions for staff before we hear from the applicant? Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Bateman, I was just wondering, looking at the timing list that you have there, there's submission, it's line 93, submission number 2. Actually, I'm sorry, the one right above that where it says Planning Commission public hearing. So there's a public hearing that we're scheduled to have on the 1st, but right above that, there's submission 1.2 changes for Planning Commission action. Is that something we meet on, or is that just a date that some documents are submitted?
Yeah, that's something that staff has built in for an interim submission. So if you guys have any changes that, will be pertinent to that action, we want to make sure that the applicant team has a chance to make any updates to their materials to get them closer to an action.
So is it that we would actually meet on the 20th to discuss this, or?
No, no, the materials would be brought to you on June 1st.
That's more for the applicant, right, Ms. Bateman? That's like their deadline to submit.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to clarify that we weren't meeting on that. So it's just 2 more meetings, basically, for us on this.
Yes, gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
I assume that means that by getting it on the 20th, there's enough time for staff to review it and then summarize it and provide it in our package for the 1st. Is that kind of
yes,
the plan?
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I mean, I had other issues, but I can wait till after the developer presents.
Okay, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any staff questions? If not, then I guess we will throw it over to the applicant to provide their presentation. Who's presenting for the applicant here?
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Allman. I'm a land use attorney with Venable in Tysons, Virginia. We've got our whole team with us this evening, and I'll introduce them briefly, and I'm sure you'll hear from all of us at some point or other this evening. Perkins Eastman is the authorized developer. Perkins Eastman is our architect who will be speaking after I tee up the application and make a few high-level remarks. But we also have Trammell Crow, who is the developer of the senior housing building, and we have Walter L. Phillips on the line as well. They're our civil engineers.
Great.
If you can advance to the next slide, please. So as Emily had mentioned in her staff report, the senior housing building is located on Block D1 of the West Falls Development Project. This first came before the city for approval in 2019. There was an amendment, as she noted, in 2021. Those approvals established some very high-level development guidance for this block and for the remainder of the development, setting minimum and maximum ranges for criteria for density, building height, use, setting out the street grid, etc. With respect to building D1, there was conceptual approval of the development statistics, but no actual architectural design approved or no detailed design drawings associated with the building. So that is the application that is currently before the city that we're advancing at this time, and an SESP application which sort of fills in those gaps and provides the information about the actual building design. Next slide, please. This chart here shows where we started and where we are today. I won't go through every single number in here. This is more for everyone's reference. But generally on the far left of the chart, you can see those minimum and maximum ranges established for the senior housing building. In the center column, you can see the most recent conceptual approval from August 2021, and the building that, again, was sort of approved on paper, but without an actual design to go with it. And finally, on the far right, you see the current development statistics. And these have continued to fluctuate a little bit as we move through the process. So what you're looking at is more of a snapshot in time. We do anticipate that we'll have final development statistics ready for our upcoming resubmission. And that way, when we come back before you for your action hearing, you'll have the final design, and these statistics will be more locked in. In a moment, I'll turn it over to Perkins Eastman to show you the building and show you the final design. But I just want to note that what you'll be seeing is primarily architectural images, and you won't be seeing too much about the streetscape or the ground plane or the public realm. And the reason for that is these elements of the approved entitlement really haven't changed from that original 2019 approval and the subsequent 2021 amendment. A lot of those design assumptions and criteria have been carried forward and implemented as part of our application, pretty much verbatim. Those details include things like the approved use of the site, the building footprint and its orientation, the street grid details, the streetscape design, access and circulation around the block, the plan for parking in the adjacent above-grade garage, and there have been some adjustments to those ratios, but generally the programming and use is still in line there. The community benefit commitments and our voluntary concession commitments as well. Those are all carried forward in a very direct way as part of this submission. So I think the best way to conceptualize our proposal at a high level is an implementation of what's already been approved rather than a request for a modification or some deviation from what's already gone through the city process. So I'll go ahead and turn it over, and our design team will show you a bit more about the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. This is Gary Steiner with Perkins Eastman. Can everybody hear me okay? Great.
Yeah.
Good evening, members of the commission and city staff. Matt, whoever's driving, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the sketch on the upper left of this page is the original SESP approval for this site. And the site that is D1 is shown as a white block, or we've referred to it in the past as a sugar cube. But essentially what it is it's a U-shaped building that's 14 stories tall that faces the courtyard that is surrounded by the three sides of the building, faces Commons Boulevard. if you look at the sketch on the right on the top, you'll see our building shown now with some level of detail. The elevations have been designed preliminarily, and you can see that it is essentially the same. It is still a C-shaped building, although it is 15 stories, which is allowed in the zone, and that the courtyard faces Commons Boulevard, just as the Sugar Cube did in the preliminary approval. The things that are different, though, are that the center bar, the long wing of the building that connects the two sort of wings of the horseshoe, is wider than it was in the original design. And that's very specifically done so that we can get appropriately designed apartment units on both sides of the corridor in that main bar of the building. The second change is that the top floor of the building is set back, and it does not run out over the wings of the U. And we did that very purposefully to provide some relief to the skyline as you look up to the building, and so that it's not just one parapet height, but rather the building terraces, and it's much more handsome that way. The third thing that we did was we created a mechanical yard for all of our rooftop equipment, which is screened from view on top of that 15th floor. So that's our mechanical yard where which is also a large proportion of green roof. And then lastly, we've added some balconies. So the independent living units in this building, which are on floors 7 through 14, many of them now have their own individual balconies, which will provide many of the residents with their own outdoor space, which is very important. The large diagram at the bottom of the page just points this out in more detail. The next slide essentially looks at the building from the other direction. So this is basically from the Virginia Tech building across Mustang Alley, looking up Commons Boulevard and looking at the other side of our building, and really just pointing out the same 4 changes to the building as they compare to the original SEE. So very consistent with the previous approval and very consistent with the scale of the condo building across the street. Next slide, please. When we first came to the commission, when we asked for an approval of an additional 35,000 square feet, the building that we had proposed was shown on the left. And although the mass of it is very similar to what we're talking about today, the materiality was different. We had conceived of this building as a red brick building with buff-colored brick, and that was the imagery that we had proposed. As we went through the development of the design and we started looking at other issues such as construction durations and maintenance and things like that, we determined that we would prefer to make the facades of the building out of architectural precast. And as I said, we've done this for a number of reasons. Number one, we think it's actually a more handsome building. But number two, the precast panels are large in scale and they're hoisted up and welded in place very quickly. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to erect this building in a much quicker way than we could if we hand set thousands and thousands of brick on scaffolding. That's going to be a benefit to the neighborhood because our construction operations are going to be shortened and the noise and disruption will be minimized. So in doing that, we also made a change of color, mainly because architectural precast really looks better in earth tones and grays than it does in reds and browns. So the building on the right, which is where we are today, is an architectural precast building in 2 shades of gray as opposed to a brick building in red and buff. The next slide, please. When we had our work session with city staff about 10 days ago, one of the things they asked us to do was to add some other perspective images that showed the building from other locations. So this shows the building in its precast form in the gray colors from both ends of the site, and you can start to catch what we refer to as the rear facade, but the facade that backs up to the alley and faces the parking garage. You can see that in sort of acute form here. The final development of the building is represented in the next images on the next slide. So, thank you. So here you can see the building fully rendered with all the shade and shadow and depth that we intend to provide. The 2 little biscuits, as I call them, in the middle are actual material samples of the precast. So they give you an idea of the fineness of the texture. It's almost like limestone. and that the two colors of gray, there are two planes to the building as well. So the light colored plane sits forward and the dark colored planes sit back. And that gives a lot of shade and shadow and depth and movement to the facades. And then you have the balconies, which you can see that are surrounded by glass railings. So they provide a third material that makes the building sort of gives it a sort of horizontal read. We've broken the verticality of the building up into multi-floor chunks. Especially you can see that at the base of the building, and then in the independent living units where the balconies are, you can see the two-story read. And again, all of that is intended to bring the perceived height of the building down to a more human scale. In order to get an understanding of how the building functions, the next couple slides have some floor plans on them that I'll walk you through really quickly. So starting at the ground level, which is where one would enter the building, the lower left diagram, we enter the building right in the center on the axis of the building. It is a very symmetrical building. So our entrance, where the yellow is the front door to the independent living, senior living building. You'll come in there, and everything then to the left is part of the senior living program. So the pink colors are living rooms and amenity spaces with a large restaurant on the end of the building facing Mustang Alley. In the back of the building on the alley, the gray spaces are the kitchen, and then the sort of purplish or the shared loading dock and the shared trash room. And then on the right side of the page, the aqua-colored or blue-colored spaces are the retail spaces, which could be subdivided into one or two or three different spaces. So that's what happens on the ground floor. Going quickly down to the basement, which is the top diagram, which is all gray and yellow. Down there we have a variety of service spaces, all of our utility entrance rooms for electric, for water, for fire, for gas, for telephone. All those service rooms are down there, as well as bike storage for both retail and for senior living use. And then we have staff spaces down there as well. So this is all service and support to the retail and to the senior living building. Moving up the building, the second floor, which is in the upper right-hand corner diagram, is primarily amenity space for the building. But you'll notice the white spaces, which are basically a two-story overlook. So the living room and the restaurant spaces, which are the primary amenity spaces on the first floor, get lots of light and air because they are a two-story space that comes up into the second floor. On the alley side of the building, we have multi-purpose, we have administration and sales, and we have some other amenity spaces. And then we have a handful, 4 to be specific, of independent living units in the orange color on this Magnolia Street and Commons Boulevard elevations. That's the second floor. The third floor is our memory care floor. It's a secured environment for residents with dementia and other with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. It's self-sufficient. It has 22 memory care units. They're all studio units, and they're clustered in sort of neighborhoods, one on each side of the building, but they're connected in a circular loop where residents with wandering challenges, which we know is a very common thing with these residents, can walk in a controlled environment in safety and actually also be able to go outside. So the large rectangular space at the bottom of the page in the pink color is actually an outside terrace that's accessible only to the memory care residents, and it's totally secured so they are not endangered. I'll add that the two green or aqua-colored shapes on that terrace are part of our stormwater management program for the building, and those are raised bioplanters that occur open to the sky, and they will take rainwater that is piped to them from other roofs on the building. Going upstairs now, we'll go to the next slide. Now we enter the realm of assisted living. So on the fourth floor, this is the upper left diagram, we have our first floor of assisted living. The pink spaces are all the amenity spaces that support this floor, as well as the 5th and 6th floors, which are primarily assisted living residential units. The gray and the purple are back of house and support spaces. And then we also have a small balcony terrace that runs across the top of the memory care terrace below. That's right there. It's accessible from the assisted living dining room, and that's an outdoor space available to the assisted living residents. The units on this floor, as well as the fifth and sixth floors, are a combination of studio units and one-bedroom units for all the assisted living residents. And on the fifth and sixth floors, which are identical, you'll see the units that are laid out there, and the larger ones being one bedrooms, the smaller ones being studio units. As we move further up the building, this would be independent living now, and this is the top right diagram. We have 16 units per floor, many of them with balconies, which you can see, and these are all one bedroom and two bedroom units. And all the floors are identical, there are 8 of them, and then finally we cap the building with our penthouse level, the 15th floor, which is another amenity space. On the left-hand side, we have a sky lounge, which is a large social gathering space. Then we have fitness and wellness spaces and games and activities. And then on the right-hand side, we have our outdoor pool, our indoor pool, and spa and our locker rooms. There are 2 large terraces on this floor, which sit on top of the roof of the floor below, one there and one on the other side. The one on the left is adjunct to the Sky Lounge, and the one on the right is adjunct to the pool. And those are large outdoor gathering spaces where residents can get together and enjoy the view and the outdoors. You'll also notice 2 green spots, or boxes, if you will, on these terraces, which are also bioplanters and part of our stormwater management program. And then on top of the penthouse level, we have our mechanical yard and green roof, traditional vegetated roof, all of which works to satisfy the stormwater management requirements for the building. And then finally, the last page is some tabulations, which have all been restated on the first page that Mr. Allman talked about, so I don't think there's anything here that we really need to cover. And that's the architectural design of our project.
Okay. I guess before we move on to other topics, are there any questions on the architectural design? Any questions or comments from commissioners on that aspect of it? Ms. Coleman, I see your hand popped up.
Yeah, thank you. I did have one question about the bridge to the garage. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how you chose where to locate it and where it is located on the garage levels and how that relates to where the parking is.
Yes, you can see the bridge on the left image right there, and you can also see it on the second floor plan. We chose that location because we wanted to tie into a public floor that was available to everybody. For instance, we didn't want to tie in on the 3rd floor because that's the secured memory care floor, and the 4th and 5th and 6th floors are assisted living, and we didn't want to disrupt those residents. So the 2nd floor made sense because it's an amenity space open to the entire community. It is in a location where it ties to a landing and the elevator core in the garage. So it's a quick trip to get from your parking space down the elevator and across the bridge into the 2nd floor of our building.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to further that, most of the senior living parking spaces are clustered around that landing. There are some on a different level, which is where the elevator comes in.
Got it. Okay. I thought they might be on the 2 levels above where the bridge was located. I was curious about, it's not very close to the elevators. I was just curious about why it was sort of at that, I don't actually know what end of the building that is, but on the right side of the building, I guess I'll say.
Again, because that's where we were able to catch a landing that had an elevation that made sense with our 2nd floor.
Yeah.
The alley.
So it's really how.
Yeah, the alley drops in elevation as it comes towards us in this diagram. So if we were to cross up the other end, we wouldn't have enough clearance to get trucks under, or or we wouldn't be able to tie into the second floor of our building.
Okay, thank you. I figured
Sure.
there was a reason for it.
There always is.
Okay, yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Okay. Is there, I mean, maybe I missed, was there a rendering of that walkway or sky bridge?
No, we'll provide one.
Okay, I was gonna say, I mean, I know we made out of precast concrete, or precast panels, but I want to make sure that it's, obviously, it's going to be pretty visible being elevated as it is, and so, I think that needs to be designed carefully as well. Okay, and any other comments or questions on the architectural components or architectural design? Someone's hand popped up. Mr. Hira, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering how this building fits in with the rest of the architectural designs for the entire area. And so to contextualize that, I guess my first comment is, why did you choose the red brick initially? Did that tie into what you think is going to be planned for the rest of the area? And I guess I say that because you've made a pivot, and I like the pivot that you made to what we're seeing today. But at the same time, this is, I think, the tallest building, and it is going to sort of set the tone for the entire area. So I'm sort of wondering how this new design fits in with what you think is planned throughout the rest of the area.
Well, thank you for the question. In a development like this, we always want to see a variety of architectural styles, and we really don't want to have a lot of sameness, but we want to be respectful of the context of the building and where it sits. So across Magnolia Street, or what used to be referred to as Street B, is a mid-rise residential unit that was largely a red brick building. Across the street, Commons Boulevard, is a condo building, which is much taller, and it's almost as tall as this building, that is gray and white, black and white, sort of, a little more contrasty than this building. So we felt like drawing from one or the other of those two buildings for a palette, although the actual forms of the buildings are all very different, would make it a good neighbor. As I said, initially we were red brick, and we were sort of trying to be respectful of the building next door to us. But when we changed to precast, a red colored precast is just not going to look good. So we decided that we would sort of play to the building across the street, which was closer in scale to this one anyway. The form is much different. The fenestration is different. The shapes are much different, but the palette resembles the building across the street.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I guess, what makes it hard is, the Virginia Tech building, I think, is brick, and that's not going to be there. It's not, there's all sorts of things going on in this entire development area that we just can't control. But I think it's important because each building is going to make decisions that are cost effective for that building, and to make sure that we keep some cohesion and really think about what's happening in the plots that are adjacent and nearby, I think is really important. And I know that's not really for you as the architect of this building, but I think for our city staff and for us as planning commissioners, we've got to be thinking more holistically. And when an important building like this makes a change, we've got to sort of take a step back, think about what does that mean for the rest of the sites that are going to come forward and come before us. But I really like what you've done. And my other comment, though, it's not really about architectural design, but it is about this area, and maybe I'll hold on to it, but I'll just preface it and preview it that, again, we have this common amenity space, and I think we've talked about this last time this building came before us. We have the high school. We really have to be thinking about how to socially plan this area, so it's important to plan architecturally, so that there's cohesion. But I think even more importantly, it's about the cohesion among the residents and the users of this entire area. So we've got, our middle and high schoolers, and we have the elderly here, and we've got to think about how we plan these amenity spaces so that they're utilized by different populations in a way that that works for everybody. So I hope that we are thinking about that. In this building, I think, is going to be important, and it's going to be utilized by people that are at different age ranges. So in terms of socially planning, we've got to think about that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hira. Any other architectural comments? I mean, one thing I noted, I'm just maybe you could comment on this. I mean, again, I'm far from an expert in sort of the design of senior living, although I've worked on, been involved in a few projects, and I'm interested in, like the memory care aspect being like in a multi-story building. Maybe I missed it. Do they have some kind of like access to any type of outdoor space on that level?
They do, sir. There's a large rooftop terrace. It's about 30 by 70, 30 by 80, right there. It's all outdoors and secured so that there's no chance of them falling over.
Right. I mean, I know for those folks, having some outdoor space that they can, be safe, but they can get outside is important and good. I also see, so is there would be like the ability for them to walk around like a loop of the floor there too, potentially. I know like in some other, memory care type settings, folks, they've designed like outdoor but contained like walking paths that, give them the ability to move around and walk and but it seems like perhaps there's some of that here. Yeah, and I know must be facilities like this in more dense urban places. There has to be, and it's good that there is. But I was curious how to deal with that part of it.
Well, we do have the loops, sir. Both the yellow corridor network loops, and it loops also into the exterior courtyard. We haven't shown a detailed design for the exterior courtyard, but it will also have a loop as well.
Okay.
I'll also say that a building just like this is really where we see a lot of the market going into walkable neighborhoods in an urban context. And a stacked building like this is becoming more and more common in many, many cities across the country.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Any other questions for the architectural elements here? I guess I'm not seeing that, so I don't know if the applicant was going to discuss any other aspects. I know the city staff, commented on some other issues related to, some transportation issues, some environmental issues. I don't know if there was anyone else who was going to hit on some of those aspects, or if we just want to open it up to commissioners to kind of have at it on other topics. Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I can go ahead if it's appropriate. I did have some comments on one fiscal item, but then the rest of it's, I guess, on the environmental side. First of all, before I get into the fiscal thing, I'll just add my 2 cents that I liked the change from the brick to the architectural precast. It does give it a more modern look, and I think it fits in nicely with the condo building across. I also like the addition of the balconies. So thank you. Thank you for that. First question has to do with the fiscal side of this, and Mr. Fuller, you may have enough institutional memory that you can recall this, but going back to when the city approved the Kensington, which of course is another senior care facility, there's a lot of discussion back then about a supplemental, I don't know if you'd call it a tax payment, but it was a way to come up with a value for the building. And I guess the thought was you couldn't rely on a traditional income approach, and so you had to come up with, I think they had like a basket of 10 properties that they came up with to develop a basis for coming up with the valuation for the building. Now, it may be that that's not relevant here because there's an overall comprehensive agreement that, you know, kind of takes care of the fiscal aspect. But I'm just curious, Gary, whether you recall that discussion on the Kensington, and was there any carryover to this facility since it's in concept a similar type of facility?
Thank you, Gary Fuller, Deputy Planning Director. Yeah, it was based on how the building was treated as a use, and then how it was evaluated from the assessor, and then that all related to the actual tax revenues you would get from it. And it was subject to a classification that reduced its tax revenues significantly, and so therefore this calculation or agreement was made up front to classify it a certain way, and have a certain amount of revenue on it. I haven't worked on the West Falls Church project at all, so I'm not familiar with the discussions. But Mr. Stevens, raises a good point in that this is the same type of use, and so from an assessment standpoint, the way we classify it, we get little taxes. So I think the thing to do would be to go back to the fiscal impact model run on it, and so maybe we can report back on that prior to your public hearing. And then probably the other thing I was going to mention later, and we can do it, is I think it would be good for somebody to ask for a breakdown on the parking, and I can allude to some of the aspects of that later, just so we understand, the residents, the employees, and the retail. We've had a lot of issues with Kensington based on the number of employees. So I know that didn't answer your question specifically, but we can report back. I think I can talk to the other staff about the history of the discussion on this in the context of West Falls, and then we can look at the fiscal impact analysis in particular. And Becky can maybe shed some light on that for us. So let's report back to you at your next meeting on that.
Yeah, that's fine for tonight. I suspect the city council, since there's several members there that were around when the Kensington was discussed, it might be good to kind of walk that back and say, here's, if it does apply, how so, and if not, here's why, kind of thing. Might be helpful. Second item has to do with a question for the applicant, and that is whether or not all of the resident units, will they be equipped with electric appliances?
Yeah, we have not gotten far enough in the design of the project to finalize the selection of interior appliances.
Okay,
we're aware of the desire to go all electric for the city of Falls Church.
Yeah, definitely. It would certainly cut down on the cost, I would think, in terms of not having to run gas leads into all the units. It would certainly be healthier, given that this is a senior care facility. I think not burning fuels inside of rooms would certainly be a good thing. And then the thing that I think the city is mainly concerned about, that it's a way to get to a ultimate lower greenhouse gas emission profile, given that the grid is going to be converting to renewable energy. So for all of those reasons, I would strongly encourage you to look for a way to make all of the appliances electric. We've been certainly going in that direction in the last couple of developments here in the city. So it'd be great to have this one continue on that same path. Next item has to do with the charging stations for electric vehicles. I see that there was one thing I read in the staff report talked about 10 stations. Presumably that's a level 2 station, and then one fast charger. And I'm just curious if it sounds like you're probably not going to be into the details enough on this, but I'd be curious to know whether that's a 150 kilowatt or a 350 kilowatt version, which is emerging pretty rapidly as the newer standard.
Yeah, I don't know. We are actually not building the garage. FGCP is, and we're just buying the spaces from them. But I'll let Ray and Robin know.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. The next one has to do with bike parking. I saw there were 6 spaces for the retail, 21 spaces for the residents, a few others as well. That seemed at first glance to me to be a little bit on the light side. But the question I have is, if that turns out to be light and there's higher demand for residents to park a bike, is that something that you can add to as needed?
Yes, we have a general storage space planned for the below grade level of the project, and we could certainly convert some of them to bike parking. I will say it's this is in line with other projects that we've looked at, so we feel comfortable with where the bike parking numbers are shaking out.
Yeah, I think that's fine as far as your initial estimate goes, but it'd be great if you had the ability to expand that without, some great amount of effort. Since the city is really trying to promote more biking, so it's reasonable to anticipate that demand will rise over time. The last item I had has to do with the secondary criteria for special exceptions, which encourages projects to deliver a minimum 20% improvement in energy performance. And this came up kind of briefly during the city council's referral. And so I would certainly align myself with supporting that this secondary criteria element to be met. This is a very prominent building, and I think meeting this particular secondary criteria would be important for the city to have. So I'll just weigh in on that point of view. And that's all I had.
Thanks, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Prentice, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the applicant. I think the architecture and the design is very good. The building is very attractive. I did have a question about the parking. I'd like to talk about the ratios, as Mr. Fuller mentioned, but so it's a 2/3 increase in the parking allocated to the building within that garage. Is that right? Or is there additional parking that's being constructed in that garage? Or both?
Yeah, so the 75 spaces had been allocated to the senior living building. Now they're 125. The overall number of spaces in the garage did not increase.
Got it. That's great. Okay. Then can you talk a little bit then about Mr. Fuller? You mentioned the ratios, and I wasn't aware of any problem with the Kensington parking. Can you provide a little more clarity on that one?
Yes. There was a large discount and a TDM for the employees, and it turned out that the numbers we had on the employees was like a shift level, but when you have other therapy and other consultant people coming in, that almost doubled at times. And so we've had a number of issues with parking in the neighborhoods, and it's been ongoing. And so it ended up being that the actual shift was much bigger when you calculated everybody that was coming in, and there was inadequate parking on site. So anyway, so you've got retail 7,900 square feet, and then you've got 212 residences, which 132 are independent, and then 58 are of course just assisted living, and then you got 20 memory care. So the question would be, what's allocated for the employees, and what are the employee numbers to really see if we're adequate here. So,
okay, that makes sense. So, but the ultimate impact is just an allocation within the parking structure, not a change in the design of the building itself.
But it sounds like you've got the parking structure, and then you're able to, I guess, lease additional spaces, and that's what they were doing for over 75. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. So, the size of the garages was set as part of the SEE and then the previous SEP applications. We are buying 125 spaces in that garage, and that was a negotiation between ourselves and FGCP. And, third-party visitors, family, whatnot, will all have the ability to park in transient parking spaces throughout the development. They'll largely come, during normal work hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So, I think they'll largely be using spaces in the garage that would otherwise be unused. So I think, from a overall utilization perspective, it's a net benefit for us to hold down our parking spaces. I can tell you that we're building almost the exact same size project in Alexandria that has 150 parking spaces and utilizes the same methodology because that is attached to a medical office building that has about 300 spaces where we have a shared agreement to allow for our transient parkers to park in the medical office spaces. We envision that occurring here as well. And then the reason we were comfortable with the difference between the 125 and 150 spaces is this is a very metro accessible site. And we do anticipate that a number of our lower wage workers, servers, some care staff will be taking metro to and from the project every day. And I think that a TDM plan in this location relative to the Kensington will be far more effective. Certainly the Kensington's not too far from metro, but that would not be my preferred commute every day if I was going to and from metro to the Kensington. So that's kind of our rationale for the number of spaces and the kind of real world example of how we got comfortable with it. And overall, we feel very good about the parking. I do think we're going to use it all, but I think we're adequately parked. So
in terms of the SCSP approval on the parking, was there a breakdown by residents, employees, and retail? Or basically, can that be provided then on what was approved? Just so we have a breakdown of it, understand it.
Yes. Happy to provide that.
That would be fine for me. Thank you.
And for me too, really what I was trying to just ward off is that we're not going to try to build additional parking here because of something that's happening at the Kensington. So I'm happy with that answer. That sounds great. The TDM plan is good. Respectfully, I think there could be a little bit more. I'm glad that there's a parking cash out element to that. I think that's very smart, especially for this particular building. And I don't think we have to answer it here, but as you all know, oftentimes TDM plans will have a transportation coordinator that helps to provide alternatives and helps to ameliorate some of the transportation challenges. With this particular complex of projects, it seems like a transportation coordinator for the whole enchilada probably makes sense. I don't know how that happens. I don't know if we talked about it here. I don't know if it happens at different for other buildings, but it clearly I think would make sense here. But really appreciate the answers. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Any other questions or comments on the parking or anything else? Ms. Weiss.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the comment that Derek made earlier, and I think I asked at the last meeting. I would like to hear more about the retail program and the publicly available spaces in the building. As the mother of a teen and the daughter of seniors, if this isn't done right, I do foresee, potential for some teen-senior conflict. And I think really careful thought about how this works for everybody and kind of clear signaling that this is a space for everybody will be really important to make it work. So I'm just looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that.
Certainly appreciate the perspective, and I hope that we can avoid any teen-senior conflict. So the retail is going to be built by Trammell Crow Company, but it will be owned and leased by FGCP. So What we've discussed with them is that this will likely be no more than 2 tenants, but there's a very good chance it must be 1, given the configuration of the retail space. They, are planning a mix, restaurants, boutique fitness, services, and other kind of more active uses for the project, and are very concerned about the overall placemaking. We have all the infrastructure necessary for a restaurant, and given kind of the corner location here, right across from some of the commons elements, I think that's very likely for a merchandising plan, but we'll have to talk with them to get more specific insight into tenants they've seen and their particular vision for it. In terms of interaction between retail and then the senior living spaces, we have really only one public entrance and exit from the building, which is the main lobby. So you come through the vestibule, and then you're, right directly in front of the concierge desk. That'll be manned 24 hours a day, and that is really the control point for managing interactions between our residents and the surrounding development. And I will say, we generally speaking love the mix of uses. We view the school as a tremendous asset. I think one thing that we like about the urban living model is we want residents to feel like they're engaged with the community. And, personally, I would expect and hope that you're seeing quite a few of our residents at games, volunteering at the school, what have you, just so that they can maintain a place in the community to live in. But overall, very few, if any, real concerns about, kind of how our residents will interact with the rest of the development, and no concerns at all about security, given kind of the way people enter and exit the building and the location of the desk.
I think that all makes sense. Can you, on that bottom left diagram, is that little black arrow to the left bottom, is that an entrance to the retail? No. Yeah, right there.
That is emergency egress from the building. That is
Okay.
not a typical entry point.
Okay, so the only entrance is through that main lobby, which will feel like the entrance to, like, what, a mall,
Like
a series of restaurants, a senior living home. Like, what will it feel like? And I'm picturing
It will.
my child walking home with a horde of other teenagers, as happens regularly, and they love to swarm on Starbucks or whatever happens to be in their path. Will they be swarming here?
So, this is a Class A residential project. This will look like the condo lobby across Commons. This is absolutely not going to look like a mall or a Starbucks. I mean, this is a very nice residential building that will look. There's nothing to worry about on that front, I think, is what I would say. Like, it's going to look like a really nice apartment building, a really nice condo building.
Okay. So a horde of teenagers wouldn't just spontaneously
intimidating.
wander
I
in.
think no.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Conlon.
I just have one quick question to follow up on that. At the back of the house, the entrance, I think, sorry, if no. On that level, on the ground floor level, at the back side of the building where the garage, is that an entrance that's for the public, or is that an entrance that's just for sort of back of house?
That is a emergency egress access point.
Okay, so if you have residents or their visitors parking in the shared garage, they would walk around the building to the front entrance to access the building?
So if you are a resident, and you parked in the garage, you will most likely bob in through a secure door at the end of our garage walkway, right? So that's the bridge that connects to the garage building.
On the second floor?
Yeah, so you would fob in, and you would come in on the second floor, go to the elevator core, go wherever you want. If you're a a visitor, you would come out, walk around, and go to the main lobby in pretty much all instances.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any additional comments on the site plan here? Mr. Harrow, is your hand back up? Go for it.
Yeah, I'm back up. Could you just remind us again the second floor amenities? I mean, I think we kind of discussed what's on the first floor. Now, on the second floor, there's going to be some. These are not just amenities for the residents of the building, right? These are common amenities for the community as well, or am I off on that? This is just.
I've got this. So they're primarily amenities for the residents of the building, but very often the operator will have events that are open to the public. But the large spaces up here going from left to right across the top are a large multi-purpose room, the sales offices and leasing offices, the administrative suite, and then a salon and spa. And then in the middle of the building, there are public toilets and a theater. So the rest of the space is private. That would be for the 4 residential units.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure, but I guess it's more for the residents, and maybe there'll be something up there that people might access, but it won't be unless you're going for a certain specific thing. So again, we won't have the high school kids like trying to go up there and accessing and anything. But I would just say, William, I think you did a good job of kind of explaining to Ms. Weiss about what it was going to be like to enter, and it's clear that this is going to be, Class A, luxury. I mean, the tenants that you have in this building are going to be paying a premium, and they're going to be wealthy. But I really think it is important, though, and you mentioned how it'd be great that some of the residents will be going to football games, and I'm sure many of them are going to go out and run and walk and use the track, and use sort of the public spaces of the high school. But I think it's really important to think about this entire area and how you are going to have multiple, there are going to be packs of teenagers walking through, no question, at certain hours. So how you sort of handle that, they are going to be interacting with your residents. And I think to be very proactive and think about inviting students, or having programming, just making sure that this building isn't seen as something totally separate from what's happening at the high school, I think is really going to be important, so that it isn't just a security guard outside that basically pushes kids away as they come out of school. It's something else. And I really think that's important, because in communities you have conflicts along racial lines, income lines, but also age. And knowing that you have these two vastly different age ranges in this space, and which is actually kind of a tight space, it's going to be important for you to have relationships with the high school, and for the high school administration and the students having relationships with your building operators and also your residents. So I really encourage you to put some money behind this and plan something, so that will be preventative from having some kind of conflict that either deters your residents from wanting to be there, or creates a situation where you're going to have to pay for security to move high school students away. And you just don't want that type of dynamic in a place that should be very vibrant, very inclusive, and very caring. So you have to think beyond just, getting the proper income to pay for the building and the construction and have it be operating. You've got to think kind of beyond the bricks and mortars to the social element of the space. And I haven't really heard that yet in detail. And I think that's important as the detail of all the architectural detail that you gave us today. So with that, I would say thank you. And I hope that when you come back to us for full approval of this, that you bring the social element detail as you brought the architectural detail to this work session today.
Yeah, I mean, I can respond to that. I mean, I think the first thing is that we will draw the residents for this building from Falls Church. So the people who will live here are going to be members of the community. I think it's actually an important thing to bring up. Just unlike an apartment building, where you might have folks who are moving to Northern Virginia or maybe relocating inside of Northern Virginia as jobs move around and whatnot. Almost, I'd say 95% of the people who live here will either have lived in Falls Church and are seeking to age in place in their neighborhood, or will be the parents of adult children who live in Falls Church who want to relocate either out of preference or out of need to be near family. So you have a different level of engagement in this building and the residents of this building for the community than you have in any sort of apartment building that you would think of in the city. Just off the bat, it's the nature of the project. Now, I think the second thing is you talk about societal engagement and how we want to interact with the community. I think the initial response to the previous question was about safety, and I certainly didn't want to give the impression that we weren't planning a safe project. We are absolutely thinking about that. We recognize that this is a vulnerable population. That's why we have 24/7 concierge. That's why we have nurses on call at all times. So wanted to make sure that concern was assuaged. In terms of our residents' engagement with the community, I mean, that is why we're building vertical senior living projects now. That's why we sought out mixed-use environment like this. You need to be located in a dense urban area so that you can engage with the community as you age and you're not as mobile. And we love the fact that it's close to the high school and the programming there and the community events that are going to take place there. So I'm not worried about it, either from a resident's perspective or from the community's perspective. I think that this is going to be a tremendous addition to what's a great mixed-use project, that mixes both private development with public development and community uses with private uses. And, from even inside the private uses, residential, healthcare, retail, grocery, for rent, for sale. I think that this is a real wonderful neighborhood. And because it's such a mix and melting pot, a lot of these concerns, I think, will naturally be taken care of because you have such a variety of experiences, uses, and perspectives that are coming with the mix of the development. So we're incredibly optimistic about how this will unfold. We think the FGCP team and the city of Falls Church are incredibly forward-looking, and the way this came together is fantastic. And, we just are going to look to build on that, both with the building itself and then with the operations. And I think everyone who lives here is going to be attracted to this building because of those attributes. So totally understand where you're coming from, and we're just really excited about it. So.
All right.
Miss West, is your hand back up? If so, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just to come back to the point, because this is the part of the project that really worries me the most. And I just want to underline what Dr. Hyra just said about wanting to see more about this when you come back to it. What I'm hearing a lot of is passive design, like we're designing this project in this way and it will all work out. I think my hypothesis is that to really make it work, we'll take some more proactive programming and design and engagement, both in terms of active marketing to potential residents of this building so they know what they're getting into, and the people who choose to live here. Yeah. I've already thought about sending this to my folks because I'd love for them to live in a place like this, right? And they love to be close to their grandparents, but I think it's important to signal to everybody who's a potential resident there that this is in a high school community, a vibrant community. And, you know, similarly programming and designing so that the kids just don't spontaneously swarm in there the way they do the CVS and the Starbucks and everything else, but so they also don't feel like they're being pushed out. So I really would like to see some more proactive programming around this when you guys come back to us next.
We'll make a point of addressing it.
Go ahead, Ms. Kama.
I just have one last thing. I would like to kind of better understand the streetscape and how it relates to the building. I understand that it hasn't changed and that you shared those details in an earlier submission, but to be honest, that's really hard for me to find. So it would be helpful if, I don't know, if you could either just add that to this package, if that could be shared again with us. And I would also like to understand just how it relates to the architecture as you conceived it, because that's evolved as well.
We will add we'll add another page to this that shows the first floor plan with the streetscape in color, and it will pull it back. It will be its own page. It'll pull it back a little bit too, so you can see the comments.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Well, there's not any other comments on this. Not seeing anybody else. Appreciate the applicant's time this evening to run through this and answer these questions. You know, we've seen this project, I guess, from many different angles. I mean, starting from the big picture stuff for those of us who've been on the commission a few years, and you know, we saw this when they asked for the additional story of height. I don't even remember when that was, earlier this year or end of last year. So we're kind of getting down to the finer scale details here on the site plan for this particular building. But you know, we've watched it evolve, and I think it's continued to improve as it's gone through this process. And this will be a prominent building. It will be the tallest building for quite some distance around. You know, certainly, you know, once you get out of Tyson's, until you get to Arlington, this may be the kind of a landmark. So it is important that we get it right, and then it, you know, kind of represents the what we're trying to achieve here at West Falls Church. And I think it's certainly getting there. Okay, so if there's not anything else, and I'm not seeing anybody else, I guess we'll thank the applicant team again, like I said, and we'll see you again in a few weeks on the 1st of June, I think, is the tentative schedule. And we'll take this up again at a public hearing for a recommendation at that time. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, everybody. So moving along here, that takes us through our work session, brings us to item 8, information items. Before the director's report, are there any planning commissioners' reports they'd like to share? And I know there was an attachment on the, if I can pull it up here. Too many screens open. Let's see, was this something from the planning commissioner? Yes, did someone want to run through this Alexandria affordable housing brief?
Mr. Chair, I sent that in. I just thought it was an interesting piece on, obviously it's here in the region, and in Alexandria, showing not only does the affordable housing that they analyzed not decrease property values, which is a concern for a lot of residents, but it actually showed a slight increase. It's a complex report. It's filled with regressions and things like that, but the final conclusions are pretty interesting. So if folks don't want to read the numbers, maybe just the beginning and the end. It's most parts.
No, it seems, I mean, it's great to see somebody, you know, actually, you know, because of course that's one of the concerns, if you will, that you know, is often levied, you know, against or maybe not against, but that's brought up in relation to affordable projects, and to have somebody objectively and quantitatively looking at the data, to see if there's any, what actually does occur, especially here in the region too, to have it be a local example is even more valuable, I think, in helping, to make the argument and to help dispel certain, probably certain concerns that folks have that may not be well founded when you look at the data like that. So no, that's really interesting. And thanks for sharing that. Any other planning commissioner reports? Ms. Coma.
I didn't get a chance to send this, and you all might have seen it, but a couple days ago, the Arlington County, they have a draft proposal for their missing middle housing study that will call for some missing middle housing types to be legalized in residential zones throughout Arlington. And it was interesting. I mean, they're talking about everything from duplexes up to, I think, 8 units, an 8-plex on a relatively large lot. But one of the interesting things in the piece, there's an Arlington Now piece that I can send to Emily to share. They don't expect very many units or very many lots to actually be converted to multifamily housing, because it has economic disadvantages when it's compared with larger single detached homes. So the article says, based on the financial feasibility and study of other jurisdictions, only approximately 20 lots per year would become missing middle, or 94 to 100 units. So it's not nothing, but it's maybe not really what you might expect with a change that's that large. So anyway, interesting process, and I think now they're going to have some community conversations about the draft proposal. That's something we should keep an eye on.
Thank you. Absolutely. Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up real quickly on Andrea's comment. I briefly looked at that report, and I think the reason that they didn't expect very many units is because they're going to stay within the footprint that's allowed for an existing building, so you're not going to be able to expand out to a larger part of the property. So that'll certainly by itself limit the number of units that can be built.
Yep.
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting because it wasn't even just about the number of units, but the number of lots, the number of property owners that might choose to redevelop their property as a duplex or triplex. Or I think people have the feeling that this is going to happen all over the place as soon as it's permitted, and they're saying no, that isn't the case. That's not what other jurisdictions have experienced. So I haven't had a chance to read the study deeply. It just came out, so curious to read it.
Very good. Is that Mr. Duncan? Your hand up? Go right ahead.
Thank you. Hello, y'all. Thanks for your usual diligent deep dive into the senior building there. Those are questions that did not come up when council, I think, discussed it at the EDA last night. So it's helpful. Probably, I just did a quick Google. It looks like the Senior Resource Group, which is going to run the building, runs 32 communities in 7 states, serving 5,000 people according to their promos. So there must be other places. And these are some very upscale places, Austin and Tacoma. I don't know, upscale places like Falls Church or more. There must be some experience that SRG group has with community relations and senior interactions and so forth. So it would be helpful to have more of that known before we go to final approval. So thanks for your question. The other those articles that you flagged are interesting. I had seen them. The other article I wanted to call to attention was the announcements, I think yesterday, right? That Amazon is dropping $55 million onto Fairfax to expand the pre-existing plans for a affordable housing building out at Spring Hill Road. which is going to serve 30 to 60% AMI, which I think sounds like, you know, a dedicated, affordable building community, which is an interesting, you know, entry into the market and something that I'd like to see discussed here in Falls Parish. We've always been a little shy about dedicated, affordable buildings, but I'd at least like us to keep an eye on what Fairfax is doing out there and see if a smaller version of that might have application for Falls Parish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Let's see, anybody else have anything they'd like to share for the last couple weeks? All right, not seeing any other hands, so we'll move along to director's report, which I guess is Mr. Fuller tonight. Go right ahead, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. Just, I have two items. They were not included in your package. One is to kind of go over your upcoming schedule, and second is to follow up on your discussion earlier in the meeting regarding planning commission meetings and nights and so forth. We have a request from Parks and Rec that I'll discuss in one moment in regard to liaisons and so forth. So just to start off, our next meeting is scheduled for May 18th. We do not have any items for that, so we're recommending that we cancel that unless the Planning Commission has any other needs. So I would ask for your comments and concurrence on that. And then on June 1st, we have the public hearing scheduled on the item we just discussed, the West Falls Church Senior Living SESB. And following in June, 2 weeks later, we have the East End Small Area Plan. So we have some items coming up in the subsequent meetings. In terms of unscheduled items, we've had 1001 Lincoln Avenue, the subdivision that you had seen previously. They have officially withdrawn that application, and we've received that in writing. So we'll be removing that under the unscheduled items.
Yeah, that property's back on the market, and I saw the for sale sign went back up on that property, which it sounds like, yeah, we may see it again, but who knows? But yeah.
Yeah, maybe in a different configuration. Yeah. So in terms of the cancellation on the 18th of May, any comments or discussion on that?
Anyone? I don't know if we'll get a lot of objection to a week off, but
yeah,
from anybody. Not hearing any screams of no, we must meet. No one has anything pressing that they needed to schedule, so I guess that's fine. And perhaps, like I said in the beginning, Mr. Fuller, that might be good. I know I'm working with Paul, with Mr. Stoddard on, again, working on getting us back in person in June, so it gives us a little more time, I guess, to perhaps prepare for that. I don't know if we'll be ready for June 1st or perhaps the second meeting in June, but that is the goal. I know I've said that many, many times before, but I think the time has finally come to get back. And I think most other, at least in the region, most other planning commissions are meeting in person in some capacity. Most governing bodies are meeting in person in some capacity. So I think we can do it. I think if anyone has any sort of issues about that, we can bring it up here together, or if someone has something they want to bring up offline, we can too. But the goal would be to get back and start meeting again in City Hall. But stay tuned for the exact date on that. It may wind up being the second part of June, but that's the latest I have on that. So yeah, it didn't sound like there's any objection to canceling May 18th. So I guess you can go ahead and announce that. Send out a notice about that, Mr. Fuller, and we'll enjoy a couple weeks of relative planning commission freedom.
All right, we'll post that, send out notice. Thank you. All right. So on the second item I had, we had a request that Paul received and passed on to me. Danny Schlitt with Parks and Rec. He's the staff liaison to the Parks and Rec Board. One of the Planning Commission member liaisons, Commissioner Teets, is actually a voting member on their board. based on their configuration, and there's a conflict with the current planning commission meeting night and their meeting night. So currently they meet the first Wednesday of the month. So they were considering, and so they kind of wanted to run it by planning commission of moving to the second Wednesday. And then of course, all this occurred when, the planning commission was meeting the first and third Mondays, and due to the pandemic and the council bumping, that we went to first and third Wednesdays, and that also bumped the AB from first Wednesdays to second Wednesday. So, the Parks and Rec would be the same night and time as the AB, so that also affects that liaison. And then I know Commissioner Teets is also a rep on the CACT, which meets the second Wednesday.
I saw that. I was like, oh, now
it's complicated.
overlap again.
What?
I overlap again if we move.
That's what I was pointing out. So, we've posted the schedule, and so I was asked to bring this up, and I'm kind of just highlighting the conflicts. So I don't know whether there is any thoughts on anybody changing or just telling Parks and Rec that, we've got all these conflicts. So anyway, I just wanted to propose it to you that they want to move to the second Wednesday, and what are your thoughts?
I think that's a good thing, because it is a problem for them, because they have a quorum problem sometimes. And so when I was able to go regularly, like, I would help them get quorum. But I guess in that case, I wonder if I could trade CACT for someone else that's not on the second Wednesday.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have a conflict either way. I mean, right, if we move to the second and fourth, it's CACT. The first and the third, it's Parks.
Well, Rex and Parks moves to the second Wednesday, that it's no longer in conflict with us. But then I can't go to Rex and Park and go to CACT.
So
that's really the issue now.
Okay. So you need to.
I'm happy to pick up CACT, my old stomping grounds. Melissa,
yeah, I mean,
that's helpful.
Because I think it's really important to go to CACT, and I think Rex and Parks is important too, because I read their minutes and stuff, and they have a lot of land issues and things as well. So yeah, so if you could do that, that would be great.
Sure. I'm kind of light because Mr. Hyra picked up Housing Commission. He's the main liaison there. I'm a backup. And then Mr. Stevens is still going to the EDA meetings. So yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kamat. All right.
So that would, in other words, would you guys then in that case support their idea of moving to the second Wednesday?
Yes.
Sounds like we would.
All right. And I'm not going to bring up the issue of us moving back to Mondays because you brought it up earlier, or staying at Wednesday. So I'll let you guys talk about that whenever you feel like it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll wait. I mean, that's something that I know we brought up, months ago, and I'd like to talk to Mr. Stoddard about that. I know there was like staffing issues on your side, Mr. Fuller, that I know Mr. Stoddard felt like there was some, not having to overlap with City Council. I feel like that was always kind of a negative for us when we overlapped with some of the City Council meetings on Mondays. So I don't know how people feel. I mean, I know it's been a while now since we've even met on Mondays. I've kind of gotten used to Wednesdays, and some of our newer members did not meet on Mondays. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we can continue to chew on that. For now, I guess, because as far as we advertised, for this calendar year, the meeting dates were set as Wednesdays. So whatever we would do, that we'd be talking about the next calendar year, correct?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's yet to be determined. So, but all the comments that you mentioned from Paul are correct. There were a lot of conflicts with council on Monday nights. Them always having work sessions at the same time, and staff having to be split between the two meetings. So
right, it was hard to get staff, and people were running back and forth. Now I don't know. Again, with Paul was again talking about the way, just trying to, staff getting back to in person and what that means, and again trying to deal with that. And so I know Paul's got a lot on his plate as far as staff and juggling. I know he's had some turnover. So let's table that for now. And
of course,
I can talk to Mr. Stoddard offline and see what his thoughts are. And if of course, if any commissioners have strong feelings about it, feel free to let the group know. But for now, I guess we'll stay the course, and I'll talk to Mr. Stoddard about that. If I'm, people don't have major issues with Wednesday nights, I mean, I guess the preference would be we'd continue this way. But again, we can continue to talk about it.
Very good. That's all I had under the director's report. Any questions for me?
I had one, if you don't mind, Mr.
Sure.
Kressner.
Go right ahead.
So, I'm assuming a lot of the other commissioners have been hearing this talk about changing the transitional zones, the transitional land use, change the zoning or change the way it would be used, or, there's been all kinds of things that have come up at EDA and council meetings about this. So, I'm a little bit concerned because I kind of feel like the Planning Commission has kind of been shut out of this discussion, these work sessions on this issue. And obviously, if there's going to be any kind of zoning code revision, it will have to come to us, and we will have to act upon it, because that's just how zoning code revisions work. But I am getting messages and people coming up to me who live off of Park Avenue and some of the other streets that have transitioned. They're very, very concerned because there really hasn't been any public outreach. Now, I understand right now that it's gone back to staff, and staff is looking at it again, and they're not really sure what's going to come out of it. But I just wanted to put it out there. I really like at our next meeting, obviously we're not meeting the 18th, but at the next meeting, even, if it's not at that point where we're supposed to be, looking at any kind of revision, I'd like to get at least some background information about where we are at that point, just so that I can actually, all I have is what I'm seeing, and some video clips and meetings, minutes and things like that. But I think we need some background on what's going on here. So,
agreed. Yeah, I'll discuss that with Paul. I'm sure he'd be happy to give you an update on that. I think we've been trying to, as staff, we're not really. We lost Susan, our consultant, and we don't really have the staff to pursue it at this point. Okay. But in terms of, the concept, it's not clear as to what the council's objectives are. And we haven't really done much staff work other than some consulting work a year ago. So we kind of just put that on the table, not having anything else. So that's the basics of it. But, that's a fair question to get some background on where we are and what we've discussed so far.
I guess for the public, what they're hearing is things like they could suddenly be a by right 5-story building right next to their property. So, yeah. And I don't know if I think that was in some of the EDA discussion. So I think that there's just some confusion out there about it, and there hasn't been any real public meetings on it, because I know all of it's still kind of speculation, discussion, and stuff like that. But I think if we could just have something in our meeting where we have a nice overview, tell people we're months, probably maybe even longer away from getting to a point where we actually have a change that we would actually put up. It would be helpful.
Yeah, that's pretty much where we are. So yeah, I'm sure Paul will be able to give you a quick update on that. He's been working on that. Anything else?
All right.
I'll certainly, Mr. Chair, this is Phil. I'll certainly encourage that to happen. June the 1st update. I mean, it is a topic that has got a lot of interest among some on the council, and there have been discussions of it at the EDA and the EDC and elsewhere. And Gary's right that we have a staffing backlog, and those of us who are interested in seeing language haven't been able to see it because there hasn't been staff to draft it. So I hope that by the 1st of June, we could see some language and all begin to talk about the same thing. The bottom line is we're trying to incentivize infill development on smaller parcels, and there are honest disagreements and competing thoughts about how best to do that.
Thanks, Mr. Duncan. Yeah, I mean, I recognize those competing things, and I guess, you know, I think the problem is it's just been discussion and people aren't sure what's happening. So anything we can do to clear that up. So thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just to, you know, follow up on that, I mean, I think as the planning commission read, I mean, I think we certainly haven't been contacted about it, at least not in any kind of formal way. I had heard stuff months ago, you know, maybe from Paul, that there was some interest in that, but we, you know, hadn't really heard, you know, much recently. So again, in the spirit of, you know, working collaboratively on these types of things, because, you know, the zoning code is, you know, along with the comp plan, is kind of our twin babies, that we work with week in and week out here. So, you know, a significant change like that, you know, something certainly we'd like to have some input on early in the process, recognizing that it sounds like, right, it's been on, it still is early in the process. But so I'll just echo Ms. Tietz's concern that, you know, we be, you know, kept involved, you know, even more so than the EDA, although they certainly have a role to play. But, you know, statutorily, the planning commission has arguably a more significant role in any zoning change. So yeah, we appreciate heads up on things like that. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, this was somewhat of a brief meeting. I guess we'll enjoy those when we get them. So I don't think we had any other. We had no. Oh, no, we did. I'm sorry. We had correspondence. I'm about to skip the all-important 8C correspondence. We had one item of correspondence, which was just we were copied on a memo to council on the ESC comments on the Capital Improvement Program, the Environmental Sustainability Council. Those who don't know ESC, so we were copied on that. Folks can review that. That's other, unless there are any comments on the correspondence. Are there any other final? Oh, Mr. Stevens.
I was just going to briefly say that their memo basically supports a lot of the things that we did in commenting on the CIP. So good news, I guess.
Right. No, I didn't think anyone would object to anything that was in there. So great. All right. Any final thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, deep philosophical musings? If not, then thanks everybody, and we'll see you all on June 1st. Enjoy Memorial Day, and it's hard to believe that's coming up before we meet again. And we'll call tonight's meeting adjourned. Thanks everyone.
Great.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
19.
Good night.
Good night.